Before watching the video, I recommend that you watch the first and second parts to understand the context. Thank you, and now we can continue watching.
Mermaids are an incredibly ancient race with a rich history, but unfortunately, their origins are shrouded in mystery. Many underwater scholars have tried to understand how such creatures with a human upper body and a fishtail, capable of transforming into legs, could have emerged. As is often the case, there are two perspectives on this: the mythological one, which is held by mermaids, and the scientific one, which is held by all other races. Let's first take a look at the mermaids' version. According to their legends, long ago, there were gods on earth, each responsible for their own domain. Zeus ruled the sky and the earth, Hades ruled the underworld, and Poseidon ruled the sea. They were all equal in power, but Poseidon was the strongest, which is not surprising. And all was well, until Hades and Zeus tried to destroy Poseidon, for which they conspired with one of the sea titans, named Oceanus, and gave him the trident, with which he could be compared to Poseidon. The battle of the gods lasted many years, but in the end, Poseidon won, of course, with the help of his children, the mermaids. Hades and Zeus retreated, and Oceanus was killed. His trident was hidden somewhere at the bottom of the sea. In gratitude, Poseidon still watches over and protects the mermaids from hardships and troubles. Of course, there is no tangible evidence to support this version of history, except for the trident, the origin of which remains a mystery to many scientists. However, the mermaids firmly believe that this is how it happened, and they refuse to accept any alternative versions of their history. Nevertheless, we will explore the perspective of the scientists and anthropologists of the underwater world. According to them, the mermaids did not emerge overnight, but rather through a long and gradual process of evolution. It seems that the mermaids once had a distant ancestor known as a Nereid. This ancient and mysterious race was a close relative of humans, and it is believed that they shared a common ancestor from whom they diverged around 3 million years ago, becoming a separate species. Very little is known about the culture and daily life of the Nereids, but it is known that they had some form of writing and language. The Nereids were a semi-aquatic race that could live both on land and in water, and they lived on the northern coast of Africa. Over time, through evolution or some unknown anomalous phenomenon, they learned to grow a fishtail when they entered seawater. After this, the Nereids spread to other oceans, gradually evolving into various types of mermaids. Of course, the mermaids themselves consider this version to be false and incorrect, as the very idea that they did not come from the god of the seas and oceans, but from a common ancestor with humans, disgusts them. However, this is the closest theory to reality, as there is no evidence to refute it. In any case, about 1 million years ago, the ancestors of mermaids spread all over the world and began to gradually transform under the influence of their environment. Some of the Nereids evolved into siren sharks, while others became deep-sea mermaids. However, we are currently interested in the common mermaids, who also spread across the world and began to change. The so-called Caribbean population with brown skin emerged on the coast of the Gulf of Guinea and the Caribbean Sea. Why these mermaids are called Caribbean, you will soon understand. In the seas of Asia, the Asian population was born, with long straight and black hair, and finally, in the Mediterranean Sea, the European population appeared with red or blonde hair. At this time, the peak of the Ice Age came, and eventually the Mediterranean Sea was closed by land and became a large lake. And in this large lake, the mermaids were not alone. Their neighbors were leviathans, sea snakes, hydras, charybdis, and capricorns. It so happened that the mermaids were the weakest physically of all of them. For this reason, they almost immediately pledged their allegiance to the strongest race in the Mediterranean, the leviathans, becoming their vassals. The mermaids paid them tribute in the form of raw meat, and in return, the leviathans promised not to harm them or interfere with their development. It was during this time that the mermaids learned to process polymetals, engage in agriculture, create their own set of laws, and build their first city, called Tethys, thus becoming a fully developed civilization. It was also during this time that all the mermaids of the Mediterranean united under the banner of their first queen, Oceanid the Great. It was under Oceanid that the mermaids adopted the belief in Poseidon and the divine origins of their species as their official religion, a belief that would continue for the next millennia. Despite their dependence on the Leviathans, the mermaids' lives were not particularly difficult as long as they paid their tribute every few months. However, everything changed when the Leviathans suppressed a rebellion by the Hydras, their other vassals, and to prevent a repeat of the rebellion, they allowed the Hydras to attack other races and steal their prey. For more information about the Hydras, please refer to the video dedicated to them. In the end, the mermaids suffered the most, as they were the weakest race in the region, and it was easier for the Hydras to capture their prey. It was during this time that the capital of the Mermaid Kingdom, Tethys, was first attacked. However, this was not the last time. The mermaids' lives became much worse, but they could only resist. They could not attack the Hydras in return, as they risked angering the Leviathans. This situation continued for several decades, until the Krakens arrived in the Mediterranean Sea, which by that time already had access to the Atlantic through the Strait of Gibraltar, hoping to make contact with the local races. Eventually, they managed to make contact with the Leviathans, but they did not like the contact, as the Kraken diplomatic mission was eaten by them. This led to a war between the Kraken and the Leviathans. The then queen of the mermaids, Stephanie, realized that the mermaids had a chance to free themselves from the oppression of their overlords. They became the first race to rebel against the Leviathans, and others soon joined them. As a result, the Leviathans were defeated, and they pledged their allegiance to the Krakens and handed over their former vassals to them. The mermaids were willing to accept the Krakens as their new overlords, as the Krakens did not demand tribute or approve of wars between races. However, the other races of the Mediterranean did not appreciate being taken over instead of being liberated. As a result, the Hydras, Capricorns, sea snakes, and Charybdis rose up in rebellion against the Krakens. However, Stephanie saw an opportunity to improve her people's situation and sided with the Krakens. The mermaids proved to be valuable allies, as they knew the locations of all the Hydra cities, Capricorn pastures, and sea snake habitats, which helped the Krakens quickly suppress the rebellion and consolidate their power in the region. Queen Stephanie's bet on the Krakens proved to be correct, and after suppressing the rebellion, the Krakens accomplished something remarkable. They granted independence to the mermaids and signed a treaty of eternal friendship between the races. Having received the status of an independent race, mermaids were granted the right to move freely around the world's oceans. The mermaids from the Mediterranean took advantage of this right almost immediately, embarking on expeditions beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, first for scientific purposes and later for colonization. The mermaids began to move in three directions: northward, where they encountered the Ecuturs, a closely related race of krakens, as they sailed through the Arctic waters. The mermaids didn't get along well with them, as they wanted to populate the open territories and build cities there, but the Ecuturs were a very closed-off community that didn't welcome outsiders. The war between the two races was averted thanks to the Krakens, who stood up for their mermaid allies and forced the Ecuturs to allow them to build cities in the Arctic. The second direction was to the west, towards the Caribbean Sea. There, the Mediterranean mermaids were greatly surprised when they met other mermaids that they had never even heard of. They gave them the name of Caribbean mermaids, although they referred to themselves as Genji. In addition to their dark skin, they differed from their European counterparts in their much lower level of development. The Caribbean mermaids did not know how to process polymetals, which forced them to use stone tools, and they were unable to build large, fortified cities, leading to a semi-nomadic lifestyle. It is worth noting that the Asian mermaids faced a similar situation. The reason for this was quite simple. European mermaids lived in an unfavorable but relatively safe environment, where they had a large protector in the form of leviathans, who kept the Mediterranean Sea peaceful. Yes, it was a cruel peace, but it was still a peace. In a relatively safe environment, European mermaids achieved great success in scientific and cultural progress, but their counterparts outside the Mediterranean were not so fortunate. They lacked protection, as the Kraken had not yet fully established their dominance over the oceans. As a result, Caribbean and Asian mermaids were left to fend for themselves in a wild and hostile environment, facing fierce competition from other powerful races that hindered their development. Therefore, when they met their European relatives, they were eager to learn from them. The Mediterranean mermaids were willing to help their sisters achieve a more civilized level of development. However, this came at a cost. In exchange, the Caribbean mermaids were required to become subjects of the Mermaid Kingdom, adopt new laws, abandon their cultural practices, and embrace the new faith in Poseidon, which quickly spread among them. The same fate befell the Asian mermaids when the European mermaids rounded Africa and reached the Indian and Pacific Oceans. There were benefits for everyone. The Mermaid Kingdom gained millions of new subjects, which significantly increased its influence, while the Caribbean and Asian mermaids experienced rapid technological advancements and protection. Not only did they receive protection from their fellow mermaids, but they also benefited from the friendship treaty between the Mermaid Kingdom and the Kraken's kingdom. The Mediterranean mermaids began to create new cities, populate them, and invite their new fellow mermaids to join them, which helped them integrate into the kingdom's society. Over time, the various ethnic groups of mermaids merged into a unified community where individuals were not discriminated against based on their ethnicity. Around the time that Genghis Khan was making his victorious march across Eurasia, there was a massive Leviathan rebellion against the Krakens in the Mediterranean Sea. During this rebellion, they also caused significant damage to the Mermaid Kingdom, attacking their capital and nearly destroying it. After the Krakens suppressed the rebellion, the Mermaid Queen, Melissa II, decided to build a new capital in the Pacific Ocean, which was named New Thetis. By the end of the 19th century, mermaids had become the most numerous race in the ocean and the second most numerous on Earth, after humans, of course. At that time, their population was around 800 million. It was during this time that the relationship between mermaids and Krakens experienced its first major crisis. A civil war broke out in the Kraken Kingdom. You can find out about the reasons for this in the corresponding video about the Krakens, but in short, thanks to political games, the Queen of the Caribbean, Pearl, illegally obtained the title of Queen of the Seven Seas. As a result, other giant Krakens declared war on her, hoping that their allies, the mermaids, would intervene and help them fight the imposter. However, the then Queen of the Mermaids, Mera, pursued an isolationist policy and was unwilling to get involved in someone else's war. But the Krakens didn't like it, and then the Queen of the Pacific, Karina, Ruby Gilman's great-great-grandmother, personally arrived in New Thetis and demanded that Mera reconsider her decision. As a result, under intense pressure, the Mermaid Kingdom joined the Anti-Atlantic Coalition and participated in the Kraken's civil war. During this senseless war, several thousand mermaid warriors were killed, as well as about 20,000 civilians in the kingdom, as Pearl and her allies attacked several mermaid cities, partially destroying them and causing significant damage to the kingdom. The public opinion of the Mermaid Kingdom legitimately considered participation in the Kraken's civil war to be pointless and harmful, as it had brought nothing but unnecessary casualties and destruction. But the problems were just beginning, as hundreds of thousands of mermaids were left homeless after the destruction of several mermaid cities. They had to wait for the authorities to rebuild the cities, and in the meantime, they were forced to live in refugee camps. These camps soon became targets for siren sharks, who often launched small raids to steal unwary mermaids for their dinner. One tragic incident occurred. A 10-year-old merman named Nikki was playing tag with her 6 sisters. During the game, they accidentally swam to the edge of the camp, where they were attacked by siren sharks. They attacked the children and stole Nikki and his 2 sisters. When the parents of the kidnapped children and 35 other concerned mermaids found out, they went on a rescue mission. They tracked down the siren sharks and attacked their camp. During the 3-hour battle, 15 mermaids were killed, but they managed to save the 2 girls. However, they were unable to save little Nicky, as the siren sharks had eaten him just an hour before the mermaids arrived. For the family, the loss of their only son was a huge tragedy, as it was for the entire refugee community. For the mermaids, it was the last straw, and the refugees created a special defense force that not only protected them from shark mermaid attacks, but also launched retaliatory raids. In response to a single mermaid killed, they could kill 100 siren sharks. In some cases, entire siren sharks camps were completely wiped out as a form of revenge. There was no mercy shown to either the elderly or the children. Of course, when the Kraken learned of this, they immediately came to Queen Mira to demand that she stop the massacre. At first, Mira did not understand what they were talking about, as she was not aware of the situation herself. This was because many of the officers responsible for protecting the refugees and the officials responsible for managing the refugee camps were sympathetic to their fellow mermaids and did not report the atrocities to the Queen. In some cases, they even actively assisted the militias by providing them with weapons, volunteers, and information about the location of Camp Siren Sharks. But even when Mira was told about it by the Krakens, she didn't consider it to be something terrible, since formally the Siren Sharks were the first to attack, and in the Caribbean Convention of Marine Races and Peoples, which the mermaids also signed, it is stated that any race that has been attacked has the right to defend itself. True, Her Highness forgot that the Caribbean Convention also condemned any actions of a genocidal nature, but she did not take this into account. In any case, the Krakens once again demanded that the Queen stop the massacre, or the Kraken Kingdom would be forced to use force. Mira had to obey again, and she ordered the self-defense forces in all the settlers' camps to disband and forbid them from taking any punitive action. The mermaids were perplexed, to say the least. The Krakens had dragged them into their war, causing some of the mermaids to lose their homes, and now these same Krakens were forbidding the homeless refugees from defending themselves against the raiders while not providing them with any protection. The mermaids' opinion of the Krakens became even worse, and continued to deteriorate as new crises arose. On March 1, 1954, the Castle Bravo test was conducted at Bikini Atoll. The United States detonated a thermonuclear weapon with a yield of 15 megatons. However, the scientists underestimated the weapon's power, and the explosion was 2.5 times stronger than expected. The radioactive ash spread over an area of 11,200 square kilometers and covered the nearby islands. This also had a major impact on the mermaids, as the resulting earthquake destroyed the nearby underwater city of Coral City, which was the second largest city in the Mermaid Kingdom after New Thetis. Over 50,000 mermaids were killed, and approximately 100,000 were exposed to radiation. Queen Diana declared a month of mourning, and representatives of all ocean races, even those who were opposed to mermaids, expressed their condolences. It was a tragedy, and the mermaids wanted to respond in kind. Operation Retribution was developed, which involved sending a group of mermaids undercover to land. Their mission was to infiltrate human society, identify key nuclear facilities, and sabotage them. At the same time, everyone understood that this mission was a one-way trip, and none of the participants would return home. However, this did not deter them, as the Operation Vengeance was chosen to include the relatives of those who had perished in the thermonuclear explosion, who were willing to make this sacrifice. The mermaids successfully integrated into the human community. For several months, they lived in an abandoned apartment, went shopping under false names, walked in parks, worked as waitresses in fast food restaurants, went to the movies, ate ice cream, and met human guys, and they also tried to find out where the nuclear facilities were located, but as expected, ordinary people had no idea where to look. Eventually, one of the mermaids named Sarah became attached to humans after living with them for a long time and decided to sabotage the operation. She deserted, went to the Krakens and told them all the details. They of course sympathized with the mermaids' trouble, but did not approve of their plans. Therefore, Operation Retribution was stopped after the Queen of the Krakens demanded it from Diana. The mermaids were of course furious at the betrayal of one of their own kind, and they demanded that the Krakens hand over Sarah to them for execution. But the Krakens did not hand over Sarah to them, guaranteeing her safety. This caused the mermaids to hate the Krakens even more, and for the first time in the thousands of years of friendship between the two kingdoms, the mermaids imposed tariffs on Kraken goods, mainly polymetal products. In return, the Krakens imposed tariffs on mermaid art, which had previously been very popular among them. Perhaps the relationship between the two races could have been saved, but the next crisis destroyed what little trust remained between them. I'm talking about the Mermaid Civil War. It all started when Queen Diana gave birth to twins, Selena and Callie. Callie was born 30 seconds older than Selena, but for some unknown reason, Queen Karina willed Selena to become the new queen after her death. This happened in 1992. However, Callie refused to accept this and sought support from the Krakens. Callie promised Queen Sadia that if she got the throne, the Mermaid Kingdom would remove all tariffs on Kraken goods. The Queen of the Pacific Kraken was excited about this idea and supported Callie. She, along with her closest supporters, started a rebellion against Selena and began to confront her. A civil war broke out between the mermaids. Sadia declared that Selena was not a legitimate ruler and announced her support for her older sister. She intervened in the war on Callie's side. In the end, Selena was defeated and went on the run with her daughter, Princess Nerissa. But Callie's supporters found and captured the former queen, and after cutting off her hair, they executed her. Callie became the queen of the mermaids, but her authority was not taken seriously, as everyone knew that she was actually a puppet of the Kraken Queen, and the mermaids had become their vassals. This further strained the relationship between the two species. As for Nerissa, she and her two loyal bodyguards, Chloe and Elvira, fled to the coast, where they were taken in by a man named Howard van der Zee, who had known Nerissa's mother in her youth and was trusted by the queen. For several years, Nerissa lived in exile, pretending to be an ordinary teenage girl named Chelsea, attending school and engaging in everyday activities. However, the princess in exile had a plan to avenge her aunt and regain her rightful throne. Eventually, thanks to her allies in the kingdom and her political game, she succeeds. She overthrew her aunt and executed her herself, cutting off her hair first, just as Callie had done to her mother. After that, Nerissa became the new queen of the mermaids. However, the young queen understood that the Krakens would not ignore the murder of their ally, so in order to protect herself and her kingdom from a possible war, Queen Nerissa began to search for a means that could serve as a deterrent against the Krakens. Eventually, she discovered an ancient and powerful artifact in the depths of the sea, which was identified as the Trident of Oceanus. Once she obtained this artifact, the Queen of the Mermaids underwent a remarkable transformation, growing to gigantic proportions comparable to those of the giant Kraken. Nerissa also gained great strength, proportional to her size. This strength was enough to fight any sea creature, including giant Krakens. The news spread throughout the ocean at the speed of light, and the giant Krakens began to worry that the Mermaid Queen now had the power to resist them. As a result, the Council of the Seven Seas, a gathering of all the Kraken queens, issued a joint ultimatum to Queen Nerissa. She was required to surrender the trident, and in return, they would recognize her as the new queen of the mermaids. But Nerissa did not want to follow the example of previous mermaid queens and give up the only weapon that could withstand the power of the giant Krakens. Therefore, she refused to give up the trident, and all 7 Kraken queens declared war on the Mermaid Kingdom, known as the Trident War. I won't go into detail about all the battles and their progression, as it would take us until dawn to finish the video, so we'll just give a brief overview. If you're interested in a more comprehensive video about the Trident War, please let us know in the comments. Many underwater races responded to Nerissa's call to challenge the power of the Krakens, including the Umibozu, the Charybdis, the Ikutursos, the Sea Snakes, and many others. They united under the leadership of the Mermaid Queen in the so-called Ocean Liberation Alliance. The Krakens and their allies fought back fiercely, but they suffered heavy losses. During the war, many giant krakens tried to find and kill Nerissa, but they all perished at her hands. Eventually, in the final battle of the war, the princess of the Pacific Ocean, Agatha, defeated the mermaids and seized the trident of the ocean. After this, the Ocean Liberation Alliance disintegrated, leaving the mermaids alone against the krakens. The consequences for the mermaids were devastating. During the Trident War, hundreds of thousands of mermaids were killed, and all their underwater cities were destroyed. The Mermaid Kingdom effectively ceased to exist. However, even after the war, the conflict continues to this day. The mermaids were on the run without any command or authority. Despite this, the war between the krakens and the mermaids continued, turning from a direct conflict into a semi-guerrilla war. The mermaids, left without shelter, became easy targets for the siren sharks, who often attacked them during their travels. Therefore, in order to try to provide themselves and their families with at least some kind of security, some mermaids are even willing to take the most extreme measure: moving to land. A couple of years after the Trident War, the mermaids created the Trail of Tears organization, which aimed to relocate desperate mermaids to land. This organization includes both mermaids and humans who know the truth about the underwater world and help the mermaids. In return, the mermaids pay them with pearls found at the bottom of the sea. The Trail of Tears is engaged in creating fake documents, providing housing with fake registration, jobs, and sometimes even placing mermaids in human families. However, they don't stay there for long, as it's difficult for human parents to explain why their 15-year-old daughter looks like an ordinary teenager after 5 years and doesn't want to swim in the sea. The mermaids who find themselves in human society actively try to preserve their culture and pass it on to their children. Despite this, life in human society still affects them, leading to some mermaids reconsidering their customs. This is particularly true for mermen's. Since human society is mostly patriarchal, life in such an environment leaves its mark, which is why mermen's on land have more personal freedoms than mermen's at sea. Although they still take care of their offspring, they have more rights and a say in some important matters of their family, unlike their sea-dwelling counterparts. One of these issues is education. The Trail of Tears can order electronic documents to be submitted to a human school and send a mermaid there who wants to receive an education, so that she can be sent to study under a false name as a citizen of another country, whose citizenship documents, as you can imagine, are also fake. In 2023, none other than the mermaid queen Nerissa, using the Path of Tears, was able to submit an online application for admission to Oceanside High School, California, as a Dutch citizen under her fake name, Chelsea van der Zee, with the goal of avenging the former Kraken princess Agatha, who was currently residing there. As for what happened next, you already know. And so, let's summarize the results. Mermaids are a very, very ambiguous race. Like all the races we've talked about on this channel, there were also times in their history when they were dependent on leviathans, and the relationship between them has not been restored since. And there were moments when, on the contrary, the mermaids actively tried to impose their interests on others, as they did with eco-tours, with whom they were eventually able to make friends. There was also a betrayal in their history, as was the case with the Hydras, the Capricorns, the Sea Serpents, and the Charybdis. In the end, the Sea Serpents and the Charybdis were able to forgive the mermaids and establish relations with them, but the Hydras were not able to do so, and even joined the War of the Trident against them. The situation with the Capricorns is more complicated, as their relationship is not entirely trusting, but it is not entirely hostile either. Our heroines also have a variety of relationships with other types of mermaids, ranging from the most friendly to the most toxic. The pygmy mermaids are the most friendly species to regular mermaids, although they were only able to establish contact a couple of centuries ago. They immediately got along well, to the point where some mermaid cities allowed pygmy mermaids to live there. This species even joined the Trident War on the side of the Mermaid Kingdom and remains a loyal ally to this day. Next, we have the kelp mermaids, with whom the regular mermaids have a good but not allied relationship. These two species engage in trade and sometimes form short-lived alliances against common enemies, but no more than that. This species did not participate in the Trident War. The relationship between regular mermaids and deep-sea mermaids is quite complicated, as these two species live in different habitats and rarely interact. Although regular mermaids have attempted to establish contact with their deep-sea counterparts, the latter's fearfulness and reluctance to engage often hindered these efforts. The siren lionfish are an unusual species of mermaid that live in tropical seas and have a long history of relationships with regular mermaids. However, these relationships have not always been friendly. The siren lionfish state, also known as the Coral Empire, has fought several wars with the Mermaid Kingdom. Despite their differences, the two species have coexisted peacefully for the majority of their history. However, during the Trident War, the siren lionfishes joined the war on the side of the krakens, hoping to destroy their competitors, which they succeeded in doing. The siren sharks are the most hostile species of mermaid to regular mermaids. This hatred is not based on any ideology or philosophy. No, the siren sharks just like the taste of their relatives' meat, and they only kill them for food. They didn't officially ally with the krakens in the Trident War, but they did help them in the war by continuing to attack the mermaids. The relationship between mermaids and humans is quite peculiar. Mermaids have been the most well-known mythical creatures among humans for centuries. They were often portrayed as positive characters in human pop culture, but after the incident in Oceanside and the revelation of information about the underwater world, attitudes towards them may be changing for the worse. And finally, the krakens. The species that essentially freed the mermaids from slavery and with whom they had a great relationship for thousands of years is now their main enemy and a threat to their existence. The krakens also harbor a mutual hatred for the mermaids. To quote the Queen of the Seven Seas, Sadia,
"Mermaids are selfish, vain narcissists with mediocre hair."
the relationship between these two races can be summed up by the saying that love and hate are one step away. But in this case, it was a series of steps that had been taken over the course of a century, leading to a gradual shift from mutual trust to mistrust and hostility, culminating in a massive war. However, it is important to note that the mermaids were not the sole cause of this conflict. The Kraken Kingdom also played a role in the situation, as they had neglected their loyal allies. In conclusion, I will quote the words of Arthur Gilman, the general of the Kraken army and a hero of the Trident War, as he said to Queen Sadia during a briefing at the beginning of the Trident War. "Do you really think that the 2 billion mermaids who live in the ocean have all sided with Nerissa because they're all evil? What is evil, anyway? How can an entire race of intelligent beings be simply evil? For every politician in the Mermaid Kingdom who wants to destroy the Kraken Kingdom, there are thousands of ordinary citizens who have real reasons to hate us. All they've been waiting for is a leader to give them a reason to take action. And that leader was Queen Nerissa.